Hello, my friends, and today we're going to discuss some of my essays on contemporary living. And since everyone here in my household seems to be in a meditative mood, as I will show you briefly from my surroundings, there's the TV meditative mind stuff going on. There's the little diffuser, and of course my cat is in a meditative mood as well. Now let's get down to business. I'd like to begin perhaps by bringing in I'll briefly read my preface to an upcoming novel. I don't know whether to call it, essays on contemporary thinking or the age of absurdism, but I'll read the preface and take it from there. The reason I chose to write about people and their absurd relationship with the world is because nowadays I find I have a lot of time on my hands, and so I can apply myself to contemporary ideas. Now that I am close to 70 years old, I sense that not only is life full of meaningless suffering by shouldering the brunt of everyday duties, perhaps the breakdown of the body as it ages, but also that in the end life can also yield a beauty born from the struggle to simply want to live. To live out the maximum number of experiences, or by enjoying doing nothing and reaping the benefit of a peaceful silence, which is good too. As my mother once called it, la santa pace, saintly peace. I find that now I carry time rather than being carried by time. What I mean by that is the notion comes through a longevity and wisdom that speaks and acts for itself without any desire to be judged by nothing other than oneself. Of course, I don't mean to live a life of solipsistic narcissism or asceticism, because we are social creatures that need to be available for each other in love and a common destiny that brings joy and a reduction of suffering. This way of thinking could have been raised in rebellion to an indifferent universe, of course. A universe sometimes doesn't care whether you win the lottery or God forbid you get cancer. Well, this universe perhaps looks backwards or forwards and concludes that heroism must have evolved from accomplishing a particular journey by Jesus Christ, for example, despite the fate awaiting him. Whether you are a culture junkie that travels the world to gain knowledge of other people, or a stand-up citizen that espouses a politically correct view of living in our cosmopolitan cities, the fact remains that we really don't know the outcome of many events or personal transformations. That may be a privilege of the gods or God, but this kind of thinking and being can't be applied to human beings just yet. To influence or predict the outcome of a war in the Ukraine against the Russians, or the eternal conflict in the Middle East between the Palestinians and Israelis, is too hard to know, let alone the fate of a married couple or a soccer score between Napoli and Juventus. This kind of rationale might seem absurd if you already know ahead of time the odds of one group winning over another. The fact remains that in many wars there are only losers and no winners. The sense that many people have suffered and died for a cause they believed in, no matter what the cost, even if it was a Pyrrhic victory, and you can look up Pyrrhic on your spare time, that's Pyrrhic. Pyrrhic victory means that the cost was too high to gain the victory. This kind of example is the one that we're living through now with the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip being decimated. This is a siren call of the absurd. A soccer match that can be determined on the smallest turn of events, like a deflected ball that catches the goalie by surprise and enters the net in the last few seconds of a match, can be truly absurd, and yet the fate can be devastating for one team and a victory for the other. I haven't much more to add to this preface, other than a rational man must leave open the possibility that the gods may suck in the end and have their own interests at heart. And these things outweigh the mortal decisions and suffering humans must endure to gain a lucidity that gives them meaning in the reality of everyday living. A better example might be found in the characters of literary fiction, as Shakespeare's Hamlet poignantly reminds Horatio, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." That great wordsmith Shakespeare. Okay. I was going to read a quick little short essay, but I could tell you a story, an absurd story that happened to me many, many moons ago, just to lighten up the mood. Well, it has to do with the scare that my son had when it turned out there was worms in his feces. And of course, we wanted to find out by taking him to the doctor and clinic and have an analysis in the lab of why they were there and what we could do about it. In the end, it was just an over-the-counter drug that helped him get rid of them. But my illustrious wife and I take Angelo down to the clinic, and sure enough, a kindly old nurse addressed the issue, but forgot to give us the little receptacle to when we went home to collect the sample from my son. And so I returned the next day with a makeshift plastic bottle I found around the house. It was an old bottle that had medication in it, and I promptly placed the feces, the sample, in the plastic container. Whereupon, as I reached the clinic with the sample, much to the chagrin of the two ladies, nice ladies, Filipino ladies at the time, reminded me that this was inappropriate, as they shouted at the top of their lungs, "Mr. Barrett, they're going to shut us down! You cannot come with this kind of receptacle for the feces." And I said, "Please, can you just scream it a little louder? They didn't hear you down the hall." And said, "Mr. Barrett, this is the proper container." Anyway, bad impersonation of Filipino accent. In any case, I did what she said. With a little shovel, I transferred the feces from the inappropriate receptacle to the appropriate ones and sent it in, while everyone, of course, staring at me from their expired magazines, outdated magazines, watching this show unfold with me, the fool. Anyway, that was a quick little story about being set up by my ex-wife for the downfall of my visit to the clinic. But let's get right into the deep dive, and let's see what they say. My friends David and Angela are back to discuss this.
Hey everyone, ready to dive deep. Today we're tackling a collection of essays that really get you thinking about, well, being human. You know, the whole deal with absurdity and searching for meaning, especially in our modern world.
It's so interesting how the author uses these everyday moments, these little stories, and suddenly you're thinking about huge societal shifts and philosophical questions.
Right. It's like, have you ever just looked at someone, like someone you know really well, or even your own reflection, and just for a second, they seem like a total stranger?
It's jarring, right? Like a glitch in the matrix.
Exactly. It's like a little dose of the absurd right in your normal life. And the author connects that feeling to those big events that kind of shake up our world. Like, think about the pandemic or the war in Ukraine. Suddenly, everything feels uncertain.
Totally. Like the ground is pulled out from under you, and everything you thought you knew is up for grabs.
It really makes you question everything. And reading these essays, I kept thinking about Camus. Remember that whole idea of the absurds we talked about?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. College flashbacks. But the author actually makes it feel, I don't know, more relatable.
Definitely. Not just some abstract idea.
Yeah, like Camus is talking about this tension between needing the world to mean something, needing our lives to have meaning, but the universe just doesn't care. It's indifferent.
It's heavy stuff, but it's like that Camus quote, one must imagine Sisyphus happy.
Right. We're all pushing that rock up the hill, searching for answers, even if there aren't any.
It's kind of bleak, but also, I don't know, kind of motivating in a weird way.
For sure. It's like, okay, the universe might not have the answers, but that doesn't mean we stop searching.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
how does the author deal with that feeling? Because they're clearly grappling with some big questions.
Well, they find solace in some pretty relatable things, like nature reflecting on memories and just, wrestling with these big philosophical questions.
Sounds familiar.
And they turn to art and literature too. They quote Shakespeare's Hamlet a lot, which makes sense, right? I mean, Hamlet is all about trying to find meaning in a world that feels totally crazy.
It's like art gives us a language for the absurd.
Language for the absurd, I love that.
But the author doesn't just focus on the big philosophical stuff. They also get really personal, really honest about being human.
Right, the good and the bad.
Mm-hmm.
And their experience working with autistic students is really insightful.
It's fascinating how they talk about the challenges, but also these moments of, I don't know, almost like a different way of seeing the world.
Absolutely. It really challenges our ideas about what's normal, what's considered typical.
And this is where things get really interesting. The author introduces this concept of a societal drought in the 21st century.
Yeah. It's a powerful image. Like, they're talking about this feeling of emptiness, this lack of connection, even though we're supposed to be more connected than ever.
Right. It's like we have all this technology, all this information at our fingertips, but somehow it's making us feel more alone.
It's almost like an information overload, but a meaning drought.
Exactly. And they talk about the impact of technology, social media, all this curated reality.
Yeah, like we're constantly bombarded with images and information, but it's also surface level.
And they connect that feeling to these larger shifts happening in society, like the decline of institutions and this pressure to constantly achieve.
It's like the very fabric of our society is drying up, like we've lost something essential.
So where do we go from here? I mean, if our current systems and ways of being are contributing to this sense of emptiness, how do we even begin to create a more fulfilling experience? That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, I'm not sure if the author has a clear-cut answer, but they do offer some glimmers of hope. Like, they talk about finding beauty and connection in unexpected places.
Right. It's those small moments, the genuine conversations, the peaceful moments in nature, like little oases in the desert.
So even in the midst of this drought, there's still a chance to find nourishment, to connect with something deeper.
Absolutely. And the author really believes in the power of self-reflection. Like, it's through understanding ourselves, facing our own complexities, that we can begin to navigate this challenging landscape.
It's like finding that inner resilience, even when the external world feels dry and barren.
Exactly. And speaking of navigating a challenging landscape, remember that story about the homeless man we talked about earlier?
Oh yeah, the one living under the bridge.
Well, that story really gets to the heart of this search for belonging, this yearning for a sense of home in a world that often feels alienating.
You know, at first it just seemed like a simple anecdote. But now I'm thinking there's a lot more to unpack there.
Oh, definitely. It's a story that speaks to something universal, something we all grapple with in different ways. I think it's going to be really interesting to dig into that a bit more.
So this homeless man, this encounter, how does it all connect to this idea of a societal drought?
Well, it really highlights this concept the author calls Edenism.
Okay, Edenism, I like it already. What's that all about?
Basically, it's this deep longing we all have, right? It's like this yearning for belonging, for purpose. Like, we're searching for our own little Eden, a place where we truly feel at home.
Yeah, I can see that. We're all kind of wandering around looking for that sense of peace, that connection.
Exactly. And the story of this homeless man, well, it becomes this mirror for the author's own search. They describe seeing this man living under a bridge and feeling, that initial pang of pity, maybe even a bit of judgment.
Oh, yeah, I've totally been there. That knee-jerk reaction.
But then the author starts to think about this man's life, and it becomes something more, it's like a reflection of their own struggle to find meaning in a world that can feel pretty indifferent.
It's that moment when you see yourself in someone else's experience, even if their life is totally different from yours.
Exactly. And the author even says, I am the one looking for my lost home, which is so powerful because it shows how this whole Eden thing isn't about a physical place, right?
It's more about this internal sense of home, that feeling of being grounded, connected.
Exactly. And it brings us back to this societal drought idea. How do we cope with this feeling of emptiness, of disconnection, especially in a world that's supposed to be so connected?
So, besides connecting with nature and thinking about memories, what are some other ways we can deal with this drought? What other tools do we have?
Well, the author talks a lot about relationships, those real, authentic conversations we have with people. Like, they describe these moments of connection as like oases in the desert.
I love that image. It's like those real connections give us something we need, something to replenish us when we're feeling empty.
It's a good reminder, especially now when everything feels so isolating. Despite all the technology we have to actually make an effort to connect with each other, to have those meaningful conversations.
To break out of our little bubbles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the author even argues that embracing our shared human experience, even the hard parts, is essential for a good life.
Wait, so not shying away from the difficult stuff.
It's more like leaning into it. The author quotes Shakespeare, actually, from Merchant of Venice. If you prick us, do we not bleed? That whole speech.
Yeah, I remember that. It's about how we're all vulnerable, right?
Exactly. We all experience joy, pain, loss. It's part of being human. And recognizing that in each other, that's how we really connect.
It's about seeing beyond the surface, seeing the messiness, the complexity, and finding something beautiful in that.
Exactly. It's not about pretending everything's perfect or ignoring the parts of life that don't make sense. It's about being real, being present. And those moments of connection, well, that's what makes it all worthwhile.
It sounds like this search for Eden, this need to belong, it's not passive, is it?
No, definitely not. The author makes it clear that it takes work. It takes being intentional, being willing to confront some hard truths about ourselves and about the world.
It's about being active in our own lives, not just waiting around for meaning to find us.
Right, we have to go out and seek it. And that brings us back to this drought idea. The author has some really interesting observations about how technology, about how social media is feeding this emptiness.
Yeah, we touched on that earlier, but let's dive a little deeper. What are some ways technology and social media are making us feel this